Coming to you from an undisclosed living room somewhere in Miami Beach. Welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor. It's not a podcast, it's a phenomenon. Here are your hosts, former Fox News political correspondent Joel Waldman and his mom, Carmela, a licensed marriage therapist and Holocaust survivor.
Karm, it's hard to believe. This is lucky episode 15, and we have finally switched to video. I am glad that we got our guest today to experiment with, considering he ran NBC News, the Today Show, MSNBC. So really the stakes aren't too high at all. Luckily, we're off to a decent start here. But we probably should have started with a dog trainer who we have lined up for next week.
Yeah, for next week. He was a fighting dog trainer in
not Vietnam.
Iran.
That was in Iraq.
That's my time.
in Iraq.
Vietnam is my time.
Karm, a couple of things I just wanted to run through with you first. Number one, as you know, after my storied high school tennis career, where I won 3 state championships and the county championship, I did not play tennis for about 15 years, 20 years, just picked it back up. I was playing today, and I came as close as possible to smashing my racket in 2 without doing it.
You did that in the past.
I've done
that. But let's focus on the subject of today.
Oh, okay. So getting to that, as we just mentioned, our guest today is Steve Capus, a very well-known person in the news business. Carmelo knows that I have a internal competitive spirit. So last night, she calls me and says, Joel, I'm telling you this in advance. This Steve Capus, he swam in deep water. He was always in the deep end. He's a big player. You could have been a guppy in the shallow end.
No, I did not use the word guppy. The rest is true.
So effectively what you were saying is,
no, I said you were wading in 1 or 2 feet of water.
And and Steve is like at the bottom of the ocean.
I will never say anything off camera anymore. Now that I became the star.
I just wanted to put that out there. We can get Steve's reaction to that in a second, but let's toss to break and we'll be right back with the main schmooze.
Do you want to help my son? His company, Content Partners Media, specializes in brand video and content creation for innovative companies and others. Please go to www.contentpartnersmedia.com and hire him. I repeat, please go to www.contentpartnersmedia.com.
Welcome back to Surviving the Survivor. It's time now for the main schmooze.
Now, Karm, I say this every week that we've got the best guests, but unequivocally, today we have our biggest and best guest yet for episode 15, our first video YouTube episode. He is the great Steve Capus. Steve, welcome.
Joel, Carmela, it's a thrill to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let me tell the audience a little bit about Steve, and this might take about 45 minutes. So broadcast, and I don't have a prompter, by the way, so forgive me, but broadcast news, as we all know, is about as cutthroat a business as there is. Few make it to the top, and trust me, I know, because as Carmela pointed out yesterday, I sat at the lowly bottom of the totem pole for most of my illustrious career. But for those who do make it to the top, like Tom Brokaw, Katie Couric, Matt Lauer, Steve, I promise not to bring him up again, although I might. Lester Holt, Brian Williams, the list goes on. 60 Minutes correspondent Scott Pelley. They all have one thing in common besides making a ton of dough. And that is that at one point or another, they have all kissed Steve Capus's derriere and given the chance would likely
have been better to say
Steve
his finger.
His finger.
No,
his ring finger.
His ring.
His ring finger. So
Thank you.
There's no other way to say it. Steve Capus is a living, breathing news legend, and here are some of his credentials to prove it. He served as president of NBC News for nearly 8 years, in charge of all broadcasts, the network, MSNBC, online properties, radio, and everything else that NBC News owns in their news division, overseeing 1,500 employees. He was the executive producer of a small show called the NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw. He was the executive producer of the news with Brian Williams on MSNBC. He was the supervising producer of Today's Show in the mid-'90s, hosted by Katie Couric, Brian Gumbel, and the lowly newsreader Matt Lauer. There's his name again. And as if this wasn't enough, Steve was also executive editor of CBS News and executive producer of the CBS Evening News. Most recently, Steve was senior advisor to the CEO of the United States Agency for Global Media. He was an executive in residence at the IESE Business School in Spain. He's won Edward R. Murrow Awards, like You Go to the Bathroom. He's got Emmy Awards and many other accolades. And despite the power and fame, Steve is the kind of mensch who comes on as a guest on our lowly podcast. He's inspired me to grow a beard, which Carmela hates. He's a huge NASCAR fan, a giant Yes, as in the musical band fan, the one and only Philadelphia phenom, Steve Capus. Steve, welcome.
A slight correction at this point. I don't like his beard. I love your beard.
Classic Karm, cutting off Steve on his intro.
Well, Carmela, you've always been my favorite.
They just met today.
Thank you for the introduction, Joel. It's great. For the record, I did not write the introduction. So any talks about kissing of any body parts has nothing to do with my description. That's all in the host's hands.
It's all on me. I take all the credit for that. Now, let me put you in an awkward position to start this, of course. Are you as embarrassed as I was that I went over to Fox News?
No, Joel.
Let's not do politics today.
It doesn't have to be politics.
No. I mean, I'll just keep this positive as I like to do. We had a great time working together back in the day at NBC and MSNBC. I think, you talked about the swimming analogy, and the only way you're able to swim in deep waters is with the support and strength of a really good team. And I was very fortunate every step of the way to have outstanding teams at NBC, at CBS, with the federal government. Just extraordinary people. Network news is not a solo pursuit. It's a team sport. And the only way that any of us, individually or collectively, the only way we enjoy any success is if the team is strong. And I was very fortunate and, thoroughly enjoyed our time together.
Thank you for that. I was telling Carmela yesterday, oftentimes when you have mentors or people that you look up to, they'll say something to you and probably not realize that they said anything impactful. But one time you said to me, news is like a monster you cannot get your arms around. And I never really understood it, but I understand it today because 30 years later, I still can't figure out news. I can't figure out the news cycles, how they come and go. And it's just this kind of amorphous entity. Do you still stand by that statement?
100%. If you think about, people have so many choices for their sources of information. I like this era. I like that there are a lot of different voices. I like that there are a lot of different opinions. But I also like that there are news organizations that are committed to trying to get it right, that spend all their time doing the basics of sound journalism, fact-checking, researching, trying to make sure that they have a diversity of viewpoints, and so forth. And there are a lot of really great news organizations who are committed to that. That's not to say that something that's opinion-based can't be strong. And I think there's some brilliant work being done in all sectors. But the news space is relentless. I do believe that it's a true calling, and it's a noble calling. Anybody who decides that they want to be a journalist, we need them. We need them in this era, arguably now more than ever. You think about it. There's disinformation campaigns, coming from all directions. People are trying to control the flow of information. They're trying to shape viewpoints. I think it comes down to, dedicated journalists to have to try to sift through all of this and try to get it right. And that's what the bulk of the people do every single day. It's never easy, but it is a worthwhile, truly noble calling to be a journalist.
And I agree with that. I think, there's been a lot of dilution, I guess is a way to say it. There's been so many media entities that have popped up, and, cable channels have had to take kind of an aggressive approach to get ratings. Let's stick with the cable networks for a moment. How do they balance, or do they balance between kind of telling the news and keeping things, to use the expression, fair and balanced? I mean, it doesn't seem like that happens very often these days, at least not on the opinion side, for sure.
I have to tell you, I think that there is some really great work being done on both sides of the net. If you talked about playing tennis, all right, on one side you've got people who are committed to doing what we would consider hard news, kind of traditional reporting, and on the other side, especially on cable, are the opinion broadcasters. Some of them are some of the best journalists around. They just happen to be wanting to do storytelling from an opinion point of view. I think it's pretty simple. Why not label opinion programs as opinion, and news programs? If you're on a channel that has the word news in it, in its title, then I think it behooves you to be honest with your viewers about what's straight news and what's opinion. Label it. You can do almost anything, but label it.
Got it. Karm, you were raising your hand.
No, thank you. I, as just an observer who is completely a layperson, and I think that from the 60s till now, to generalize, I think there has been a slow partisan approach to news with such vehemence that the actual objective news got lost in the shuffle a lot of times. I'm sorry to say that. Now, just as a total confession, because Joel was on Fox, I watched Fox and CNN. I bounced those two, and I watched very little of CBS and NBC. I also watched.
You should have lied right now, but
I could lie. I am good at that, but I decided to go honest today.
Okay. So what's your point?
The point is that there is unfortunately, my perception as a layperson, it got much worse. I think it has become like a battleground between political forces, and I believe you are one of the purists. Honestly, I believe that you have integrity and you are not for sale, but a lot of the news is not involved with integrity.
Think about it this way, I think you just hit on something really important, Carmela, because this integrity, or if somebody does something with, kind of the truest of intentions, they want to. If you're a phony, especially in the television world, it's not going to work. People are going to spot somebody who doesn't believe what they're saying. You need to be sincere. You need to be real. You need to be,
authentic.
Correct. And this authenticity comes through when people are doing it. I look at, Jon Stewart is about to launch his new television program. And I look at what Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert, John Oliver, they have taken their role, which began kind of in the comedy realm. But when you think about it, they're doing some of the best journalism going. If you watch John Oliver every single week, you'll see a very strong, reasoned argument for points of view. So it has opinion. It's very clearly an opinion program. And Jon Stewart was the master of it at The Daily Show. And my guess is that his new program is going to be equally as strong as a journalistic offering. But that's because they're being authentic. That's because they are very clearly saying what they are trying to do. And I think there's a lot of running room if you're completely transparent with news consumers about what you want to do.
I think we've touched on this, but I just want to kind of get you to rehash. So you started in news about 30 years ago. I guess it was 86. That's more than 30 years.
That's when he crossed over to Manhattan.
No, that was still Philly.
86 was Philly.
He was still in Philadelphia.
Still in Philly?
So from your time, and by the way, 86 is when my wife was born, Steve. Not to make you feel old.
Joel said a very
I was smart. I married young.
Joel said a very famous thing. He says he'll marry a trophy wife the first time.
The first time, yeah. So, Steve,
so we got the trophy right here.
In this 30 years plus,
a talented journalist, by the way. My trophy wife, who is a talented journalist, by the way.
Yes, thank you. So 30 plus year career, how has news evolved? I mean, it was a different animal in 85 and 86 than it is now.
Well, I think we saw, much more of the kind of headline news back then. We used to, at a place like the Today Show, we used to think that, we were informing people what took place overnight while they slept. Now, or the same thing with, say, the nightly newscasts. We had an understanding or a belief that the audience would come to us looking for a summary of the day's news. Now things are different. You need to, people are on their phones all day long. They're, if they're driving home from work in the evening, they're listening to All Things Considered, or they're listening to, news radio, talk radio. They know what the headlines are. So you better have something more than just that. Otherwise, you're kind of going to be deemed irrelevant. And irrelevance is the worst descriptor that anybody can give somebody who wants to be a news programmer these days.
Interesting. I don't want to get political, but I will for a minute. So
I don't want to, but I will.
Former President Donald J. Trump started to sling around the term fake news. What kind of detriment was that to journalism as a whole? I mean, what was your reaction to all of that?
Well, the thing is, there really was something called fake news. But what he labeled fake news was not.
You mean it came from him, the fake news?
Anything that was anti-Trump.
Well, that seemed to be the thing that would most likely generate a label of so-called fake news. But, look at the world context right now. And I think we're in an incredibly dangerous situation where this kind of war on the truth is absolutely raging. And when you see practitioners like Vladimir Putin or others trying to dismiss accurate information as nothing more than fake news, I think we're in a very dangerous point. And Carmela, this is going to be, personal to you. I mean, I know your life story, and here we are days after Holocaust Remembrance Day, Holocaust Survivors Day. In the run up to those evil, dark times, one of the things that took place was a desire to control the information,
propaganda,
to not let people know what was really going on, or to portray people in inhuman ways. And it's just, the world history is filled with countless examples of a time of where people have tried to control the information flow, and things get really dangerous real fast. when you start playing games with the truth.
Well, you know what's interesting about that? I was kind of reflecting on all this last night, and
you did a lot last night.
I work. Since I've been retired, I've never worked so much in my life.
But I have to tell you this. I know how important this is for Joel. You know why? Because we are doing this now 13 weeks, the podcast.
15.
15, who is counting? And he never did this. And he said to me, now, Carmela, tomorrow you don't have to be nervous. Just be very calm. Just be yourself. He never made this speech to me. I think that he's in awe of you from the get-go. And I knew details about you that you wouldn't believe. I remember after these years. I remembered where you live. That at one time he lived in, I won't name it because I don't want anybody to come after you because you were on our podcast. But you are absolutely right. You are absolutely right. I would like you to speak a little bit to the freedom of speech too, because I feel that is in danger.
Well, let me jump in for 1 sec. I was getting to what I thought was an important point. By the way, Carmela is not completely herself because she is not cursed yet, Steve. And
I will not curse today. I took a vow.
My 3 children, all 7 and under, have learned all of their curse words from Grandma Carmela.
It's not true. Some of them they learned in school.
But the point I was getting at,
authentic.
Back in 95, I guess 96, when I found out I was working at MSNBC and I would have to get up at 12 midnight to get in for my event.
By the way, I have to interrupt it because can I call you Steve?
Mr. Capus. Sir Capus.
Sir Capus. I think that you worked early morning when you first started to work in Manhattan. You worked something early morning.
Right. Well, before
and he's too much of a mama's boy complaining about getting up early.
Well, hold on. So this was my point. So when I was sulking and saying, what the hell did I get myself into? Because I really had no real idea that I wanted to be a journalist. Carmela came to me in a moment of kindness and empathy, which is rare. And she said, Joel, what you are doing is so important because of this, there will probably not be another Holocaust. Steve, do you agree with that? Do you think that the power of journalism can prevent or will prevent future genocide and other sorts of calamities?
I think there is something to it. And the proof that that statement is accurate and the power of journalism is so strong. I think the proof comes from the actions of those who want to curtail journalists. I mean, you look at what's happening. Look at what's happening right now in Belarus, in Myanmar, in Russia. You know, don't even get me started about places like North Korea. You know, I mean, there are so many places where accuracy and fair reporting of events is completely curtailed, where it's illegal to access the internet or certain sites on the internet. Why is that? Why is this such a threat? And I think we only have to look at history to surmise that information is power, and people who are, little dictators around the world are threatened by this, that they don't want people to have access to accurate information. And they go to great lengths to silence journalists, to restrict access to online news, to control programming. It's so dangerous. And it's not far from, when you start talking about, when you look at ethnic minorities being silenced or killed in certain parts of the world, the first thing that happens is they restrict their access to accurate information. And this is, this now touches on one of the reasons why I went to work for the United States Agency for Global Media, which is the parent organization for Voice of America and Radio Free Europe and Radio Free Asia and Radio Marti and Middle East Broadcasting. And that is, those networks are often the only sources of accurate, independent information all in the areas where they broadcast all around the globe. And I will tell you, a number of countries and a number of leaders go to great lengths to try to silence those networks all day, every day. Why is that? Because information is power.
Do you think that American broadcast news particularly or specifically focus enough on these stories you're talking about in Myanmar and Belarus, or is it kind of like an America first attitude? Because I personally don't feel like there's enough emphasis on anything outside
international,
Correct.
global.
Yeah.
No, I don't think there's enough attention on it, and I don't know. Somewhere so long ago, somebody decided that international news was not of interest to American viewers. I don't buy it. We're sitting here watching as Russia's leading political opponent to Putin.
Yeah, he's imprisoned.
Navalny, getting poisoned.
First poisoned, then now in Siberia.
Yeah.
Correct. And, we're watching a slow motion execution, in my opinion. We're watching it play out in slow motion. This should be in the lead segment every single night of the evening news, or at least once a week. I'll take once a week.
But Steve, why isn't it? Is everything kind of driven by ratings first? When I was reading your bio, when you were at the helm at NBC News, you were first in revenue and first in ratings. But I assume money comes first, as crass as that might sound. But why are we not covering these stories?
I think, look, it's very hard to make a blanket statement because each of these programs are different. And, I can tune into PBS NewsHour and see some outstanding reporting. They just last month had an outstanding series of reports from inside Afghanistan. And here we are this week with President Biden announcing that they're pulling out all American forces from Afghanistan. That may come as a surprise to some people, but if you were watching the NewsHour last month and you saw some really outstanding reporting from on the ground, you would not be surprised. I think there's a couple of factors that come into play. It's more expensive and more dangerous to go to a place like Afghanistan than it is to stay safely in Washington, D.C. and do reporting. I know that news budgets have been cut. I personally believe that that's a mistake. I think that the way to stay relevant is to continue to invest in news and continue to do unique stories. And I think think about people like Bob Simon, who's no longer with us, who was a brilliant 60 Minutes correspondent, who filed reports from all around the world, or Morley Safer, or my friend Scott Pelley, still working.
I'm getting nostalgic.
Yeah, but Scott Pelley's over at 60 Minutes and is still in the game and still doing some of the most brilliant work in our profession. These people are gifted storytellers. I believe that the American viewing public, will watch any story as long as it's told well. And all of those people I just listed are some of the best. Clarissa Ward, was at CNN, and just did some fabulous work. I just think of there are so many great reporters all around the world, and I want to see them on the air with reporting that matters. Liz Palmer from CBS, they're still there. They just have to fight harder. It's more difficult for them to get on the air these days when all of the news is dominated by headlines out of Washington.
Do you think that there is a polarization in this country? And if you think yes, do you think it leaks into the news media?
Is it politicized?
No. Is there a political polarization in the country?
Oh, of course.
And I have the feeling I came here.
Are you asking if the media kind of helped or engendered or created that?
No,
What's your question?
I ask, it's not the media, it's the events, the politics, the whatever, the evolution of the country, the backlash for whatever the reason. I think there is a very strong polarization. It's like when I first got married to Joel's father in 1961 and I came here, that didn't exist. Of course, the cable news didn't exist either. Many things didn't exist. The internet didn't exist. But I think through the years, the country has become more and more and more polarized.
Of course.
But why, of course? Why is that an of course?
I'm saying, of course, it is more polarized. But what I'm saying, look, we just spent a fair amount of time talking about international coverage.
Yeah.
I'll take it another step further. Why are there not more reporters for the networks stationed in Middle America?
In the flyover country.
You can be, I'll tell you, this much. Tom Brokaw is one of my friends, and he lives part of the year in Montana. And in the run up to the election last year, we had a series of conversations. This would have been September, October of last year. And he said, the only issue that people are talking about here in Montana, what do you think it was?
Karm, I'll let you guess wrong.
Probably it was about the cattle market or something like that.
Good guess. I will tell you that the news headlines were dominated by, kind of the personal attacks being lobbied by the Trump campaign against Biden, Biden trying to get traction with any number of different things. But the biggest issue out there was guns.
Guns.
And everything from, concerns about access to guns. You can have an opinion on that one way or the other. But my point is, we ignore that part of the country to our own peril. We as broadcasters become irrelevant
Easterners or Westerners.
The country. I'm sorry, say that again.
The east side of the eastern shore of United States.
Well, that's why conservative radio's dubbed media people the liberal elite media. Because I think to Steve's point, it's true. There's not when there's a snowstorm in New York, it's national news. When there's a shutdown of the subway system, which is a big story, it's national news. But when something's going on in, like you said, Montana, that might impact a lot of people, it's not national news because it's not, left coast, right coast. I think.
But I still think in the hands of skilled storytellers,
of course,
people will pay attention, and we should pay attention to people who, may have a different political viewpoint than people who live on the East Coast. And then something happens and there's this kind of hand wringing. Well, we didn't see that coming. President Trump gets elected in 2016. And how many stories did we see we
didn't see it coming. Yeah. Yeah.
We didn't understand the anger. We didn't understand the distrust of Washington. Why is that? And then it kind of drives me crazy because then I see stories. And by the way, I was producing the CBS Evening News back in 2016. I'm not trying to say that I'm, beyond reproach here. All due criticism goes in all directions, including towards me when I was at CBS. But, it's not enough to sit down at a diner and do a 1 minute and 45 second story on the news that plays maybe 15 minutes into the broadcast that says, tonight we hear from viewers in Middle America about what they really think about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And, I think that I'm concerned when we're not basing people, as many reporters as we should all around the world, when we don't tell those stories. And the same thing with inside the United States.
Now, in your new position, you will be able to lobby for that. What you believe needs to be done.
What new position? He's not with the government anymore.
Well, he will be. You said he may reveal it.
I don't know. Unless Steve wants to break news on Surviving the Survivor.
Well, I've got no news on that. I will say that area, the public service broadcasting, and whether that's the United States international broadcasters or the BBC or the CBC, these public service broadcasters who may or may not be partially funded by the government, but government funded does not mean government run. These are independent news organizations. The BBC is the best example, but we've got some awfully talented journalists who work for Voice of America and the Radio Free Europe and Asia entities and so forth. And they're doing really important work, and it's very difficult. But this is where my passion is, because I see them covering the kinds of things that I don't see as much in the mainstream media these days. Where is the coverage of Hong Kong? Just being sucked dry of all life and liberty, and where's that? Where's the coverage of the impending threats against Taiwan, of what's taking place now on the Ukraine-Russia border? I mean, there's so many monumental stories, and I kind of find it hard to believe that the story of Hong Kong is just kind of fading out, as the song lyric goes, it's fading out like the Beatles on Hey Jude. It's this long, quiet fade out, and it's just disappearing before our eyes, and it breaks my heart.
So one of the things that I is a barometer of success or not success to me is people returning your emails. People don't necessarily return my emails, but they return your emails, Steve. Are you in contact with current news division presidents or anyone to talk to them about this? Because you've got the cachet to implement change.
I think the last person they want to hear from is somebody who, either used to have their job or, right, is on the outside looking in. It's much easier from the outside to offer this type of criticism.
Right.
Look, I will say, today is a big day in the history of broadcast journalism, because a woman by the name of Kim Godwin is being named the president of ABC News today. And she is going to be the first African-American woman to head one of these network news divisions. Kim was my senior broadcast producer when I was the executive producer at CBS Evening News. I promoted Kim. I'm a huge fan of hers, and she's leaving CBS to go run ABC News. These are, when I see someone like that ascending to the presidency of a news division, I think the future is awfully bright for these organizations. She's a unique talent and extraordinarily skilled, and she's going to do great work. This is a great day for not just ABC News and Kim, but for our profession overall.
Steve, when you were a young chap at your Phillies and Eagles games, did you ever envision one day being president of NBC News?
No. Are you kidding? No. I mean, I was.
At what point did you, and maybe you never did, but did you know you wanted to become a journalist? Well,
I tell you that, when I first knew that I wanted to do something in this business, I wanted to be a DJ. And I started, playing music on the radio when I was I think I got my first job in radio when I was in 9th or 10th grade. And I used to do, after school, I would go and spin records for a couple of hours. And I mean, I just loved the idea that I could sit in an Eagles jersey and nobody could see me, and I'd be playing music and rocking out on the mighty WCSD FM in Warminster, Pennsylvania. I mean, I love that gig. That was fun, and that led to play-by-play sports broadcasting, doing some other things, and then while I went to Temple University, Bucks County Community College and Temple University were my two higher education places. And when I got to Temple, I started working at WHYY radio in Philly. I had been a newspaper reporter. I'd done all these different things. I knew I liked writing and I liked, but I loved radio. So I was working at WHYY, the NPR station in Philly. And I came up right on graduation, and they offered me a full-time job. And I think at that time it paid something like $13,000 a year as a correspondent. And I was so tempted, like if they paid me 15, I think I would have taken it. Instead, I went to the dark side. I went to work for a television station as a writer. You can surmise that the pay was much better. And that was at a CBS owned and operated station in Philadelphia. And I kind of never looked back. But yeah, I mean, what a ride.
Well,
really great.
We are speaking about radio and then the advent of television, the emphasis on television. Now it's the internet. How do you see the future of television? I guess this is a high school student would ask this, but how do you see the future of television in the age of the internet?
Really good question. And, people like Kim Godwin now at ABC News are going to be wrestling with this issue. I mean, this is an era of on-demand viewing. People want the access to their programming when they want it. The networks always used to have this kind of arrogant way about them. We used to say here, we will give you the news at this time. We will not deviate from that time. Now everything is an on-demand. People want to stream. People want a high-quality video on these types of devices. And if you don't do that well as a broadcaster or as a content producer, which I hate that term, but if you don't do that well, then you're going to be irrelevant to large percentage of the audience.
But may I say something?
You don't have to raise your hand, Karm.
I don't have to raise my hand.
Especially now, he can see you. We used to be audio only. So.
Yeah, when we had audio, if somebody talked too long, I would go cut, but now I can't do that anymore. So, no, but where were we?
A senior moment. I have no idea, but let me jump in here because I have some stuff that I'm interested in, and we're running out of time. We're running out of time here, and I've got some stuff. So, Steve, you're not going to want to answer this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I can attest to the fact that it's such a cutthroat industry. I mean, just working at MSNBC when we were in Secaucus, just the size of the building and it was literally housed in a warehouse with satellite dishes and just a gazillion people. Like you felt like you were in the middle of Times Square. How did Steve Capus separate himself from the pack, from all of those people who are very type A, very hyper competitive? How did you rise to the top, Steve?
Oh, man. I'm trying to come up with a good, snarky, quick-witted answer. Look, number one...
I knew this would make him uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You are mean. You are mean.
I began this conversation talking about the strength of these organizations. If the people who I worked with on The News with Brian Williams, which I was fortunate to be the executive producer for instance. If they weren't strong, then it would not matter what my individual talents were, then we would have all not enjoyed as much success as we did. If that had not happened, if I had not been blessed with such a strong team, NBC Nightly News would not have been a possibility. I'm one of the more unlikely news division presidents you'll ever find. My dad sold dental equipment and my mom was a teacher. There are others in our business who's come from a long line of people involved in network news. That's not my upbringing. As I said, I went to community college. I went to public school before that, community college, and then Temple University. So it wasn't for academic excellence, I can tell you that much. But I loved the business, and I loved dedicating myself to the pursuit of excellent work. I had a number of people looking out for me and giving advice, mentoring me. I think, by the way, all of us who are in this business deserve or should give back, and we should all do our best to lead by example and be mentors to those who choose to come into this profession. This is a difficult time to be joining our ranks, and so the least we can do is to help bring people along with advice and suggestions and where appropriate with promotions and things like that. And because that's all of that came into play as I found myself moving into the front office at NBC News, and then getting a chance to produce with Scott Pelley over at CBS Evening News. I know I'm incredibly fortunate, and I tried to make the best of these remarkable opportunities.
Steve, since we've had similar career paths, I say that.
Let him enjoy saying that once.
But here's my question. It's no secret, but I left Fox News because I was just not, I always wanted to get to the quote unquote network or cable network to report. And I got there and it's like, be careful what you wish for, because I was the least happy I've ever been. But I had and I still do, I really struggle with being out of news because of kind of the camaraderie, like you said, the team aspect, the adrenaline, being on live television. Or do you deal with that at all? I mean, kind of being out of the control room now and looking at it from the outside?
I remember 1 month after leaving NBC in 2013, 1 month later, less than a month later, the Boston Marathon bombing took place. And that was the first big story that took place after I left NBC. I was bouncing off the walls. I was literally in bed listening to Boston police, Massachusetts police scanners, because I was desperate to figure out what was going on in the manhunt and so forth. But you can quickly make the turn to a healthier pace.
Lifestyle.
And you suddenly, it's nice not to have to work on Thanksgiving. It's nice to, I can remember the Y2K concern that everybody thought planes were going to fall out of the sky on New Year's Eve or New Year's morning on the year 2000. So as a result of that, I was in the control room until something like 4:00 in the morning on New Year's Day while we waited for the computers to see if there were going to be any glitches. I mean, important story, it went with the territory, but it can be all consuming, and there's much more to life. And so, yes, there are days, this past presidential election in 2020, that was the first presidential election I've not been involved with in some manner in a newsroom since 1984. when I was a newspaper reporter covering Reagan against Mondale.
Yeah.
And that was a long stretch, and it felt really strange to not be a part of an election coverage. But it's okay.
Steve, if my FOMO keeps up, I might have you reach out to your friend Kim Godwin, and maybe you can put a call in for me.
He's. I think this is one of his wife is here, his mother is here, but this is his love affair.
I'm going to make a horrible analogy, but it's kind of like being a Vietnam vet. Like no one understands like what it's like to be in the trenches if you're not in news, and I really. It's turning into a therapy session, but I do miss it. And there's a couple more things I need to ask you about. But if you have any advice on that, Steve, that would be much appreciated.
Well, I mean, the good thing about it, Joel, like right now, there are so many different, what you're doing here with this podcast, there are so many different ways of making your mark, satisfying that professional itch. I look at a business like ProPublica, which didn't exist all that long ago, and in a very short amount of time, they've become one of the country's and one of the world's premier investigative journalism organizations, and it didn't exist all that long ago. And that's because of some really smart people, really dedicated people, and some terrific groundbreaking work that they're doing. And they've put themselves on the map, and they've become so successful that now they're giving back by investing in local journalism and local reporters all around the country, and giving them some sorely needed funds to continue their pursuits in places like Houston and so forth. So I admire and respect the entrepreneurship that is on full display. And, if you want to do it, there are places to do it. And again, I think it's wild pursuit.
My interpretation is that he also was very conscious of the fact, as you were also working long hours. He was on the road a lot. He was never there, and he has 3 beautiful young kids right now.
The one time I needed to be out of the house, I'm not out of the house, Steve. I should have had my kids about 20 years ago. Okay, a couple things because we are running out of time. So, Steve, give me 3 people on air who were great to work with.
On air?
On air. I bet you I know who you're going to say. You're going to say Tim Russert. You're going to say Tom Brokaw. And probably Brian.
Well, each of those guys were great. I miss Tim Russert so much. The world misses Tim Russert so much. But I'll tell you, I missed his friendship. He was such you talked about my success in my previous jobs. How can you go wrong when you have a guy like Tim Russert at the other end of the phone? Hey, Tim, here's what I'm facing. Tim, I've got to try to figure out how to do this or that. What do you think? And I was able to, I was blessed to have somebody like Tim do that. And then, the same guy who would invite me and my young son to, come sit at a baseball game with him and just have the best, time of our lives. Tim was such a force, and it changed everything to lose Tim on that horrible day in 2008. Tom has, I've got such respect for Tom. He's a friend. He's an inspiration.
He's a legend.
Yeah. And I'm working with Tom on a project as well right now, and that'll come to light soon.
Steve Capus, breaking news on Surviving the Survivor. It's going to be around the globe in a matter of minutes. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Tom. All I'll say is Tom's not done. He's writing another book. He's got a couple of various things going on, and I'm working with him on one of them, and we'll announce that to the world soon. But Brian, we had a great time. I mean, like the camaraderie that we had, and going to NASCAR races and throwing the football around in the studio to the chagrin of our coworkers. But there were just so many. Scott Pelley, to be able to produce the CBS Evening News while Scott was also a 60 Minutes correspondent. I learned so much from Scott, and he was. I think he's the best writer I've ever worked with in the business. The man was extraordinary at that, and he's such a good and decent man. But boy, I mean, you get me going on this topic, and I'm gonna, I'll talk about any number of different people who I really enjoyed working with, like Savannah Guthrie. There was just so many good people who I was fortunate to, in some cases, help move their careers along, and other cases where, I just lived and learned from their talents.
Steve will definitely not answer the flip side question, which was who was a huge pain in the ass.
I think we lost the connection.
So, can you answer this one question for me? This has bothered me for close to a decade now. I'm a huge Real Sports fan on HBO, and I know you know Bryant Gumbel. How come he refuses to tuck his lavalier mic wire behind his tie? He runs it straight down the front of his tie, and if you could find out why, I'd be forever indebted.
Bryant Gumbel can do no wrong in my book. He was a guy, when I first started working on Sunrise, when Ann Curry was our anchor on NBC News at Sunrise. And our group also used to produce the news segments on the Today Show. And got to know Bryant, got to know that whole team. I mean, Annie and that whole crew. I mean, Katie Couric. I mean, what a talented group of people. And Bryant is just such a gifted interviewer, storyteller, and a heck of a lot of fun.
Well, I want to ask you one question here. You dealt with a lot of celebrities.
Egos.
Yeah. And Joel says to me, he says, lately you behave like a diva. So I wanted
So Karm's paranoid as a Holocaust survivor. And she calls the other day. And she's like, Joel, I've been thinking, I'm not comfortable with my private life being. I'm like, Carmela, we've got 3 viewers right now, so come back to me.
No, he reassured me that we have 3, but now we have 30. Now it's too many. Anyway.
And she asked me what I was wearing today. I'm like, I'm wearing a black T-shirt, Karm. So, but she got dressed up for you, Steve. She looks good.
No, this is my best blouse. Steve, I want you to know.
If she stood side by side with Katie Couric in 1965, you may have picked Carmela. You never know. I never tried to be. I just wanted to annoy my 2 children. That was my whole ambition in life, to annoy my 2 children. One last thing I want to get to with Steve.
But I didn't ask my question.
Oh, what was your question? Oh.
I introduced it with the diva story.
We'll get to the question.
But I wanted to ask you, maybe you have a suggestion for Joel, how to deal with me now that I'm becoming a diva. Because you had to manage all these egos, right?
Yeah. I think you should tell Joel to call your agent.
Yes.
I just told him on the way here. I said, if you rush me when we get there, I'm going to call my agent.
Even my agent doesn't return my calls. But so, Steve, one thing you have to know about Steve.
You are as a client, Carmela.
One thing you have to know about Steve is he is Philly through and through. The Eagles, the Flyers, the Phillies. But Steve also has a passion for the music group Yes, the band Yes. And Steve, how'd you get involved with them? And from what I understand, you helped get him into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because you've got that kind of cachet. So
here's my Yes, Chris Squire mug.
Love it.
Look, they've always been my favorite band since the first time I saw them, I think in 1978 at the Spectrum in Philadelphia. And after I left NBC, well, first off, as I was leaving NBC, they threw a really generous, very nice goodbye party for me. And a couple of guys from Yes contributed to it with a videotaped message. And then shortly thereafter, I heard from a guy from the political world who's also a big Yes fan named John Brabender, who you might see him as a cable talking head, but John is among a number of people in the political world who's a big Yes fan. And John was trying to pull together this effort to get Yes inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He basically, Brabender is a political operative, and he said, let's use some of the same tactics that we would use in a campaign to work on behalf of Yes. And then within a few weeks of that, I found myself going out on tour with them for a couple of nights to shoot some documentary type footage and get to know members of the band, and had such a great time. And the band ended up getting in, I guess, 2 years later. And through no credit to our little effort, the band did it on their own. And but it was, what a thrill. I mean,
were you there for the induction?
Yes.
Nice.
It was at the Barclays Center in...
Wait a minute. My very, very humble, small contribution to the Yes. On the way home, we are going to listen to them.
Yes. Carmela's never heard of Yes, right, Karm?
But yes, I never heard of Yes.
Well, you may recognize some of their music.
Yeah.
Probably. Unless I was deaf then, when they were always so popular.
Well, they were huge in the 70s, 80s, 90s.
Then I was exposed.
By the way, if Steve Capus was an attorney, his billable hours would be like $10,000 an hour. So I think we've overstayed our welcome at this point. But Karm, anything else?
No, I genuinely, truly thank you. There's no other word to use.
Steve?
Well, I mean, listen, Carmela, number one, you said you don't like to talk about your life story, but Joel, when he asked me to do this, was good enough to point out your backstory. So I want to thank you for everything that you went through and your family went through. And here you are. You raised a great son who was a lot of fun to work with. Like in this business, it's a small community, and you take care of the people who you like and respect. So you're a part of the family.
Well, thank you, Steve. Thanks a lot. Thanks a million.
And Steve,
even though I told Joel, that's not a core part of my identity. It's more a core part of Joel's identity that he's the son. I think that's why I did not make that my core identity. Many people didn't even know about me about this.
I think we all draw strength from it, from those types of stories. Whether it's something that you build around or not, like you're going to instill certain values, whether it's an active or passive effort. So, it's all good. We all benefit from it.
In mysterious ways.
Karm says she doesn't want anyone pitying her. By the way, back to the diva thing real quick on the ride over here. I'm like, this is video for the first time. She's like, Joel, I was on camera last week. She was talking to middle schoolers with probably a VCR. So
a VCR.
A VHS recording.
No, it was the Holocaust month. And my daughter, who lives in New Jersey, knows somebody here. So I went and talked to 8th graders, which was a great experience, all new immigrants and so forth.
Good.
So I did that for the common good.
Steve Capus, as Carmela would say, you're a gentleman and a scholar. The reason you stood out among the pack is because you are whip smart, as they say, and you're down to earth. You've got humility, and you're just an overall great guy, especially for doing our podcast. So we greatly appreciate it, all the success in the world. And anytime you want to come on and break news, do it here.
Okay, and we'll keep the Zoom line open.
We will. Okay.
All right.
Thanks again. Thank you, Steve. Thanks.
Good to see you.
Okay,
Thank
thanks.
you. Bye-bye.
It's time for the news schmooze.
All right, and we're back for the news schmooze. But before we get to the stories this week, Karm, what do you think of Capus?
I know I cannot say this because it's
You can say it, it's your
inappropriate. I
podcast.
love him.
You love him?
Yes.
Just such a genuine, nice guy, right?
He's real.
I mean,
The
He can
biggest
ma-
compliment you can give somebody that they are real.
Real,
no
right.
phony.
bullshit. Yeah.
Bullshit,
No,
yeah.
and like that's why he rose to the top, because he's smart. He knows what he's doing.
But he's also very passionate about the news.
very passionate, very
and
very
bright.
super smart.
That doesn't hurt.
All right, this is a story that would make Steve Capus's skin crawl, but James O'Keefe's Project Veritas, you familiar with that? So
Yeah.
they're kind of a right-wing organization that tries to
No,
catch
I'm not
liberal,
familiar.
quote-unquote, liberal media outlets. So basically they
I was
released...
thinking of O'Keefe, the artist, but go forget about
This is
it.
news. So they secretly recorded footage on Tuesday that reveals CNN employees describing how the network worked to support President Joe Biden's campaign during the 2020 presidential election. They actually lured this guy who's a technical director, which is a step down from director, on a Tinder account. Do you know what Tinder is?
Yeah, I know that it doesn't exist anymore. They withdrew Tinder.
Tinder is a dating app. It still
Oh yeah,
exists.
I mixed
That's
it up
how you met
with.
Dad.
I mixed it up with the. No, I didn't meet. There were no internet then. But what was the name of the one that they abolished because they just didn't give them room on the internet? Not Robin
Parler?
Hood. Parler.
No,
I mixed
that-
up
yeah.
Parler and Tinder.
Tinder is a dating app.
Tinder
So
and Parler.
basically, this person at CNN on camera said that
Get to the
CNN.
point.
He said that CNN was propaganda, even though he works for CNN. But after saying it was propaganda, essentially said that it was good propaganda. And my point here is these are right wingers. I mean, the exact same argument can be made of Fox News Channel, don't you think?
But that's what I was doing when I was talking to Steve. Maybe I wasn't clear. Look, he's now my friend Steve. Steve Capus.
You know, my wife took my phone. Oh, no, there it is. Okay, because I need that for
But
the
what
next
happened
segment.
to your eyeglasses?
It's over there. Don't worry about it.
Okay, we have human and the universal concerns.
All right, let's move it on. Move it along here. People have been stuck at home for a year. By the way, these are all news and
That's what I
entertainment type
was telling
stories.
Steve Capus about how the country is split in two in the middle.
It's
Okay,
definitely
it's
fractured.
very sad and disgusting.
On to the next story.
I'm the big unifier. Call me.
People have been stuck at home for a year due to COVID-19 restrictions, with movie theaters closed, concert venues closed, restaurants closed, sports attendance restricted. But television and viewing is down. And now some networks and those who support advertisements are calling out Nielsen ratings for this, basically saying it's a ploy on their part to reduce ad revenue for the networks, if I understand it correctly. But do you think television viewing could possibly be down during a pandemic?
Yes,
Why?
because people are using their iPhones and they're using Netflix and Amazon.com. Amazon Prime. And that they're using the streaming videos, and they're not using the news because the news are, no offense, a lot of times not even controversial, worse than controversial, they are boring.
Now that Steve's gone, she's going to talk smack about news.
Well, I smacked the news then too. He agreed.
I know.
He smacked the news too.
So the last thing here, and this is close to Carmela's heart, the last thing we needed to hear is that two big theater chains are going out of business, ArcLight and Pacific Theaters. That was just announced. Is it upsetting to you? Do you think movies in the movie theaters are done, or do you believe that there is such what's the word? There's such a not sentimentality, but I don't know what the word is. But do you think they're coming back?
Listen, the movie theaters were showing car chases, explosions of universes, a lot of side effects. There were no such a things as movies anymore, like where there is a human story that your heart goes out to and care about the characters. So
you're saying the movie industry was on the decline anyway?
Definitely.
They were making...
No. The movie theaters are on decline. They are producing Netflix on the same, in Hungarian you say shoe mold. They're all the same. They all have to have a little sex. I have no objection. But they have a lot of cliches piled up on top of cliches. But they're producing tons of movies for streaming videos.
For Netflix and Prime.
Yeah, but
Carmel, I knew you'd be passionate about this, but we got to bounce on to the next segment. We'll be right back with 3 questions for Grandma.
Welcome back. It's time now for 3 questions for Grandma.
And we're back for a quick final segment. 3 questions for Grandma, from my kids to Grandma. You ready, Grandma? Real quick, we need
if it's anything to do with body gases, I'm not doing it.
What's inside hair?
What's inside hair?
Correct.
Why, they see it as a pipe?
You always told me to always give my children an answer, because Dad always used to say, I don't know.
No. He said it's an interesting question, Joel, but I don't know the answer.
He would never answer it. So what's inside hair? Do you know?
No, but we can analyze it. I think we can Google it.
And look at this. Steve Capus is such a mensch. He's texting me right now to say how much fun he had. Okay. Why can you not see air?
Actually, you can see air at a distance. That's why the sky is blue, I think.
And that's why clouds move. But I went like this and said you can feel the air,
yes,
but it's hard to see.
Yes.
Last question. What is your...
That's very good question, by the way. The second, what's the third?
What's your... And I know I have ADD because you can't concentrate, neither can I. What is your brain made of? And I guess that depends on the person. But in general, Carmela, what is your brain made of?
It is made of tissues, brain tissues. They are a little different from other tissues of your body.
Hear that, kids? It's tissues, like Kleenex. Karm? Tissues. Karm, what do you think of this episode? What do you think of Steve? What do you think of me pulling this together and getting him? Do I get credit?
No, wait a minute. You don't. That's not the only first times. Yeah. We are the first time on camera.
Oh, and the first time on camera.
That
you get to see my pearly whites.
No, but this is. I got so excited. I have the pinkish cheeks. No, I think it's major fun. Your
makeup artist and hair person start next week. Sorry,
thank you.
couldn't get him here.
Expects.
Everyone, thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week. Love you, America.